Hello and welcome to the History of Bangalore. I am Ramjee Chandran and this is the Ganga Dynasty, Part 5. The Gangas are the rulers most significant to the history of Bangalore. Their kingdom was located all around the city of Bengaluru as we know it today. And despite being feudatories to larger kingdoms for a good part of their reign of 600 years, they were always their own people, fiercely independent, fiercely innovative, and for all the talk of them being a small kingdom, they had large hearts, and for culture, public amenities and secular religious pursuit, an open purse. Today we embark on a new chapter in their history, and I introduce Sripurusha, under whose regime the Gangas were their most prosperous. But before I plunge into that pool, I take a moment to thank my sponsors, the Prestige Group, whose generous corporate support makes this podcast possible. Building cities one landmark at a time, they transform dreams into reality. You can be a part of the future. Simply add prestige to your life. So here we are in the 8th century, and finally, we have arrived at a moment in history with little dispute about what year we are in. Everyone seems to agree that Sripurusha took the throne in 725. But there has been little agreement on the timeline of all the previous kings, and a frustrating absence of consensus among them to agree on a date. There have been spirited arguments among epigraphists and historians, such as the debate between Carnatic historian Benjamin Lewis Rice and Indologist John Faithful Fleet on the chronology of the Gangas, much to the entertainment of decades of historians. And because eavesdropping on arguments can be such fun, here are some nuggets from their indignations. First, Rice put words in Fleet's mouth by saying, "Facts have proved too strong and Dr. Fleet has been compelled to admit the existence of kings from Shivamara in the 8th century downwards, and perhaps Mushkara 2 generations earlier." But Fleet retorted with, "I never said that." He shot back dismissively, "We need not spend any time over Mr. Rice's opening assertion that has been made carelessly and without sufficient reflection. I have never made the alleged admissions, and nothing has ever yet been brought to light that would justify me making such admissions." Historian Sheikh Ali has a generous point of view about Rice, and he said, "The construction of the Ganga history could easily be a romance of historical adventure, thanks to Lewis Rice, who was its first knight-errant." The differences in the timeline, or the differences between historians, are seemingly absurd, and opinions on dates have differed by over 100 years sometimes. But calculations must be made and published, so for this we have to head back to the time of Durvinita. It's really quite interesting. Now here's an example of the fracas. Historian Krishna Rao places Durvinita in 650 AD. His supporting evidence is the descriptions of the poet Bharavi, who hung around Durvinita when they wrote poetry together. He also refers to paleographic conclusions of John Fleet. The views of historian Sheikh Ali seem more commonsensical. In a 35-page long analysis, where he quotes epigraphical evidence extensively, Sheikh Ali distilled the Durvinita timeline issue down to 2 factors. 1. The chronology of Durvinita's reign is the deciding factor on all timelines, and 2. That Durvinita ruled for 50 years and that started in 491 AD. Sheikh Ali quotes the Nallala inscription that I have mentioned in previous episodes. The inscription said it was written in the 40th year of Durvinita's rule, and epigraphists date that inscription to the year 531. In fact, they were able to narrow it down to a date, 16th of April 531. And how do they know this? Because the inscription sort of has a date on it. It's really quite interesting to understand how this date works, so let's look at how it was written on the Nallala inscription. The inscription reads, Vaishaka Prathama Purva Vaishaka Brahmi Muhurtam. Let's break this down. Vaishaka, that refers to the month of Vaishaka. It's the second month of the Hindu calendar. typically falls in April as per the Gregorian calendar. Prathama Purva Vaishakha. This indicates a specific day within the month of Vaishakha. Prathama means first, and Purva Vaishakha refers to the first day of the waxing fortnight or the Shukla Paksha of the month. The first day of the waxing fortnight would be a few days before the full moon, and that's how they fixed it. Brahmi Muhurtam is easy. It's the auspicious time of day, typically sometime between 4 and 6 early in the morning. Now, because months generally began in a sort of lunar calendar format from the middle of the month to the next middle of the month, and if you're wondering why so many festivals in so many religions and cultures all are clustered around the 14th to the 21st, this is why. But I digress. So coming back to it, translating all of this to the Gregorian calendar is of course imprecise, but close enough. Now if we put all these things back together, the date Vaishakha, Prathama Purva Vaishakha, Brahmi Muhurtam, refers to the first day of the waxing fortnight of the month of Vaishakha, specifically during the early morning Brahmi Muhurtam period. Now translating all of this into the Gregorian calendar is imprecise, but close enough. Now by cross-referencing everything, if the inscription was written in 531, and that was the 40th year of Durvinita's reign, he was crowned in 491 AD. And once we have this, all the other bits and pieces of information line up easily, and we have a Ganga Dynasty timeline. And so, after all the squabbles on the battlefields of orthography, paleography, epigraphy, and linguistics, and, to get a little geeky, by using this date as a pivotal point or a constant, historians were able to definitively get a better fix on all other historical events. Well, so much for the maths of it all, and as I said before, the evidence on when the subject of our podcast today, Sripurusha, ascended the throne, now does not appear to be in question. So here we are in 725 AD, but importantly, we know it. Sripurusha was not the natural heir to the throne of the Gangas. His father, Ereganga, was. But because the previous king, Shivamara, is said to have lived to be 100 years old, his son, the heir apparent, died before he did, and the crown passed on to Sripurusha. And for this reason, the records of the Ganga Dynasty make scant mention of the father, and he remains in history as the son of Shivamara and the father of Sripurusha, never a king, and no matter what the debates on the subject. There are some of those, of course. By the time Shivamara died, grandson Sripurusha was already approaching middle age. Shivamara had appointed Sripurusha as the governor of Kolar, in fact as a viceroy with a lot of autonomy. So he took over as king with much experience, a good reputation, and the transition was as smooth as it could be. Sripurusha's reign was significant for many reasons. In his time, the Ganga country came to be called Sri Rajya, or Fortunate Kingdom, because it was the wealthiest that it had ever been. And this was also the time when the Ganga kingdom came to be known as the Gangavadi 96,000. Supposedly 96,000 refers to the number of villages that came under its kingdom, and smaller principalities had a number attached to them for similar reasons. There's a lot of debate on it, and some historians have the view that the number actually relates to the sort of revenue generated by each of these places. But in 900 AD or so, there was a grant of what was called the Bimpur 12 to the new chieftain of the Bengaluru Taluka, and the 12 villages of the Bimpur 12 are all listed. So by and large, there's little reason to think that other numbers don't mean the same thing. But still, 96,000 villages in the Gangavadi does call for some debate or at least question. So was Sripurusha's reign one of peace and prosperity? Prosperity maybe, but peace no. So let's look at the political milieu that Sripurusha inherited and at times caused. I'm going to take a break now, but when I return, how did Sripurusha manage to deal with all the mess that history was in at that point? Right after this.
just how the North Star is the guiding light, the star of North Bangalore, Prestige Camden Gardens is a guiding light where your search for the perfect home ends. Prestige Camden Gardens, the star of North Bangalore. Step up to luxury with 3 and 4 BHK apartments on Tanisandra Main Road, 10 minutes from Manyata Tech Park, 25 minutes from the airport, and well connected with other parts of the city. Prestige Camden Gardens. Prices starting from 2.25 crore onwards. To know more, visit prestigeconstructions.com. RERA approved.
Hi, I'm back. When Sripurusha ascended the Ganga throne, history was a mess. The Chalukyas, who were the great friends of the Gangas and for whom the Gangas had repeatedly gone to war, was facing fracture and dissolution. The Rashtrakutas, feudatories of the Chalukyas, were on the upswing and the attack. The Banas were a constant thorn in the side of the Gangas, and they were fraying at the edges. And so were the Pallavas, the greatest nemesis of the Chalukyas, each of them attacking each other, with the Gangas being caught up in several battles with them against the Pallavas. And then there were the Pandyas, who were at war with the Pallavas often, but had made friends with Vikramaditya I, and they were getting weirdly fractious. So it was a confusing time, with the center of gravity shifting constantly, waning kingdoms trying to protect their turf, and new kingdoms sniffing opportunities, smelling blood in the water. But with all the chaos around them, with everyone else attacking each other, the Gangas found themselves in a very secure place and enjoyed a period of growth and prosperity, with the luxury of being able to pick their battles on behalf of others, not to mention the added luxury of being able to lose some on behalf of others. So, without really having to look over his shoulder all the time, Sripurusha was involved in many battles seamlessly, right from his time as Viceroy of Kolar. So first he had to take care of the Banas. The ruler of the Bana kingdom and neighbor was Mahavalli Banarasa, who was a Ganga loyalist until he started encroaching on Ganga territory. So Sripurusha launched an attack against the Banarasa, or the Bana king, at Kottayur and put him in his place. While this was, in terms of scale, a smaller conflict, it gave Sripurusha blooding for his later battles against all the others. But the most remembered battle of Sripurusha was the one at Vilande, where, we might remember, Bhuvikrama had snatched the Ugrodaya jewel from the head of Parameshwara I. This was a time of attack and retaliation between the Chalukyas and the Pallavas, and the Gangas were always willing participants with the Chalukyas. And so the Battle of Vilande was between Sripurusha and Parameshwaravarman II. Now Sripurusha and Parameshwaravarman II were the grandchildren of Bhuvikrama and Parameshwaravarman I. This was a battle of the grandsons, which only goes to illustrate how the Chalukya-Pallava feud continued over generations and how the Gangas were constantly caught up in all of it. Now the fact that Sripurusha was a great-grandson only makes my point more acute. Now around 728 AD, Parameshwaravarman II had ascended the throne of Kanchi, and that was acknowledged in the charters of his successors as the son of Narasimhavarman II. His reign, however, was constantly troubled by turbulence within his own Pallava kingdom between Parameshwara and the sons of the earlier ruler Mahendravarman. Probably spotting an opportunity to make mischief, the Chalukya king Vikramaditya invaded Kanchi. He was then accompanied by Ereyappa II, one of Sripurusha's sons. Now Parameshwara II was defeated, and the Chalukyas sued to designate one of the other princes as his heir. So keeping to the character of attack and retaliation, around 731 AD, Parameshwara launched an attack against the Gangas, but this time specifically against Sripurusha. I might add briefly that in an interim battle, the Pallava king Nandivarman II attacked the Kongunadu lands against the Gangas and the Pandyas, and is said to have easily defeated Sripurusha in a battle, made forays well into the Ganga territory, and recovered the Ugrodaya jewel with a cache of treasures, and then he went and granted part of the Ganga territory to Jayanandivarman, the Bana king. But records and evidence are only partially clear on the subject. Now, the two armies met on the battlefield at Vilande, a century or so after Bhuvikrama had won a similar battle at the same location. And once again, This did not end well for the Pallavas, and Parameshwaravarman II was killed. This was the second Battle of Vilande, and Sripurusha took possession of the royal Pallava umbrella, the symbol of Pallava authority, and with that, he assumed the title of Perumanadi. This victory was spoken about a lot during his time and after, and it earned him the distinguished reputation and added Bhimakoppa to his many titles. One enthusiastic inscription described him as the undisputed ruler of the entire earth. Here are some other accolades on inscriptions. This, from the 9th century Keregodi Rangapura plates recorded in the Mysore Archaeological Report in 1918. This is about Sripurusha. Raging with fury at the head of battle, horrid with the assault of heroes, horses, men, and groups of elephants, terrific in anger, brilliant as the sun, illuminating the clear firmament of the Ganga family, a terror to enemies, doer of good, protector of the virtuous path, possessor of a good kingdom, resplendent with excellent qualities in the assembly of kings, a crest jewel of kings, was Sripurusha. And this from an inscription dated 1077 AD in Epigraphia Karnataka I found, which said, "Gaining fame as a Bhairava amidst the final deluge against his united enemies, who spread throughout the middle of the three worlds, fighting fiercely to the death in a spectacular manner at Vilande, Kaduvetti against the warlike Kanchi, and seizing the Pallava umbrella, that great king distinguished himself through the power of his prowess. Did he not take away from the hand of Kanchi king the title Perumanadi? What can be said of the greatness of the valor of the Ganga king?" These sorts of accounts, recorded centuries afterwards, do not happen unless they were great tales that are remembered and recounted for generations. Tales of wars and heroism are one thing, but we must not ignore the political acumen of Sripurusha. He was always at one point of a triangle in battles, rarely ever the principal party. This means that he could play one side at one time and then the other at another time. And then the old marriage ploy. He gave his daughter in marriage to the Pandya king, and their offspring went on to become a king of the Pandyas. Some historians rush to conclude that this marital alliance was on account of the Pallava-Chalukya dispute, but Sheikh Ali, with his cool-headed approach, cautions against such blithe conclusions. The Gangas may have well cozied up to the Pandyas because of their shared rivalry against the Pallavas in an enemy-of-the-enemy manner, but they may well have cemented this friendship through a convenient matrimonial alliance. But he points out that the general prevailing preoccupation of the Pallavas with the Chalukyas could well have come in handy for the Pandyas, who had the time and the ability to consolidate their positions. And by association so would the Gangas, due to the efforts of Sripurusha. And this is one probability to explain why the Ganga Dynasty reached its benchmark, its watershed of wealth. On the Western Front, Sripurusha was witness to another catastrophe, the bad parts of which he inherited, and this was the rise of the Rashtrakuta Danti Durga, a fellow feudatory of the Chalukyas. The entire history of the Rashtrakutas is most interesting, and I will cover it in more depth in an upcoming episode. But for now, this history of the Rashtrakutas is intertwined with that of the Gangas, and the rise of Danti Durga was only the beginning of another inter-dynasty feud that would last the better part of 2 centuries. During the time that Sripurusha was celebrating victories, licking wounds, and focusing on his interests in literature and elephant training, the Rashtrakutas were gradually rising in prominence. They began to control a territory that had been ruled by the Chalukyas for over 2 centuries. And given the deep relationship between the Chalukyas and the Gangas, it was inevitable that there would be a conflict between the Gangas and the Rashtrakutas. Sripurusha was a little more than a mute witness to the fracture and the eventual collapse of the Vatapi Chalukyas and the defeat administered by the Rashtrakuta Danti Durga, who was once a favored feudatory of the Chalukyas. Danti Durga himself had fought battles on behalf of the Chalukyas, one against the Pallavas and another one notably against the invading Umayyad Caliphate in the early 8th century at Navsari in 739 AD in Gujarat. But they weren't as closely connected to the family as the Gangas were, did not enjoy the quasi-independence that the Gangas did, and therefore they were not beholden to any lasting loyalty towards the Chalukyas. So when the Chalukyas started to have trouble at home, and Kantivarman II succeeded the powerful Vikramaditya II, Danti Durga sniffed his opportunity and attacked. First in 754 AD, and then he struck the final blow in 757 AD, defeating Kirtivarman and ending the Vatapi Chalukyas. And as I said, more about all that in later episodes. Sripurusha watched as all this happened, and Danti Durga, having enjoyed success against the Chalukyas, managed to rally key feudatories of the Chalukyas into becoming his own feudatories, barring one, the Gangas. To begin with, the Gangas were reluctant feudatories even of the Chalukyas. They were more like allies, junior allies if you like. Then they and the Chalukyas were family. The Gangas were in no mood to become vassals of the Rashtrakutas, and they really saw no reason to fear them, but enough reason to watch their backs and take precautions. So, as Sripurusha witnessed all these events unfold in the northern regions of his territory, he foresaw that the Rashtrakutas would come for the Gangavadi. However, Danti Durga, who could have posed a real threat to the Gangas, did not survive for long, and he died in 758. But his legacy passed on to his uncle Krishna I, who implemented Danti Durga's vision vigorously and set about subjecting the southern provinces of the Chalukyas. Many Chalukyan feudatories fell in line, and they accepted Krishna I's authority. Before long, Krishna I launched an invasion into the Ganga kingdom. Inscriptions ordered by him record his invasion and capture of Ganga territory in 768. It is also said that he established his camp at Mannagara, modern-day Mannakunda, and this is why Sripurusha relocated his provincial capital to Manyapura or Manne in Nilamangala in Bangalore. Now, this information comes exclusively from the Rashtrakuta plate of Tilangau and is not supported by any other evidence, but again, there is no great cause to dispute it either. So whether the provincial capital was actually captured by the Rashtrakutas or there was only mere fear of its capture leading to the capital's relocation by Sripurusha remains unclear, but all in all, it pretty much means the same thing. Historical records have intense wars that were fought between him and Krishna I. The Great War, or the Kannarasa Ballaha, saw the death of several heroes of the Ganga army. There's records of Murukode Anniyar of the Three Umbrellas, and then there is Sriravarman, described as a lion among Pandits, and there were a few of the band of the many heroes who fell in the battles of Pinchanur and Bogeyur. Sripurusha's own son and general, Siagala, celebrated in the war with the Pallavas, who was an accomplished swordsman and one of the most celebrated warriors of the age, fell as a hero in the long-drawn battle of Kagamogiyur, a place said to be somewhere in Tumkur Taluk, which has not been identified. A stone record says that Krishna I was camped at Manne in 768 during the course of this expedition, and this is said to have been an indication of him having successfully invaded the Gangavadi and occupied it for a time. But even if that was so, it would have been transitory. For all his advancing years, Sripurusha was able to thwart the Rashtrakuta aggression and, by one account, drove Krishna I out of Gangavadi and chased him right up to the Bellari district and even appropriated a part of the east of Bellari for the Gangavadi. And this is another example of the Ganga tolerance towards all faiths by his grant for a Jaina temple erected that area shortly after that time. Although the stories of his battles will occupy most pages of history, it must be said that Sripurusha's cultural side must not be ignored. A scholar, he is credited with having authored the work Gajashastra, which some historians call a definitive work of Kannada literature. He contributed generously to the arts and patronized a number of poets and writers of all faiths and languages without any bias. He gave generously to Jains and Brahmins and Hindus of all hues. Sripurusha was also known as Muttarasa, but he had earned a great many titles in his time. Muttarasika, which is a variant of Muttarasa, Prithvi Konkani, Konkani Muttarasa, Permanadi, Kanchipurti, Bhimakoppa, and Rana Bhajana. And by the time his 62-year-long reign ended, his imperial title was Konkani Rajadi Raja Parameshwara Sripurusha. And for all the wealth and for all his legacy that Sripurusha had left behind, the Gangas simply did not have another like him. Coming up soon in later episodes, the tale of the Gangas, the end of the Vatapi Chalukyas, and the rise to prominence of the Rashtrakutas. Make sure that you don't miss any of these episodes. They're all really quite interesting. I am Ramjee Chandran, and this is the History of Bangalore.